Um, you're lying in bed, the room is dark. Everyone else in the world seems to have figured out how to just close their eyes and drift off, but not you. Instead, your brain quietly opens a door, and on the other side of that door is an entire world that you built. A conversation where you finally said the perfect thing, a version of your life where things went differently, a scenario so vivid, so detailed, so emotionally real that you lose track of time inside it. Sometimes it's a fantasy, sometimes it's a rehearsal. Sometimes it's a revenge story where you finally win, and you ride that story like a wave until sleep eventually pulls you under. You've probably never told anyone you do this, because how do you explain it without sounding slightly unhinged? How do you tell someone that before sleep, you become the writer, director, and lead actor of an entire private film that exists only inside your head? So you keep it to yourself. You've kept it to yourself for years, maybe decades. But here's what I need you to hear right away. You are not weird. You are not broken. And this habit is not random. There is a deeply specific psychological reason your brain does this. And once you understand it, you will never look at those nighttime stories the same way again. Here's where things get uncomfortable. Because those scenarios you build before sleep, they are not just entertainment. They are telling you something about your waking life that you haven't been able to say out loud yet. Think about what those scenarios actually contain. In them, you are usually more confident, more articulate, more loved, more respected, more seen. The people who dismissed you in real life finally understand you. The argument you lost 3 years ago, you win it effortlessly at midnight. The relationship that ended badly, it goes differently in the dark. And here's the friction that nobody talks about. You are spending the last conscious moments of every single day living in a reality that feels more emotionally satisfying than the one you actually woke up in that morning. That gap between the life you're living and the life your brain constructs at midnight, that gap is the real story here. Because it doesn't show up for people who feel fulfilled and seen and heard in their waking hours at the same intensity. The more that gap exists, the more elaborate and consistent those nighttime worlds become. Some people have been visiting the same fictional scenario with the same fictional version of themselves for years. If that's you, pay very close attention to what comes next. Psychologists call this kind of cognitive activity maladaptive daydreaming when it becomes intense and habitual. But researchers are increasingly finding that the nighttime version of this behavior is rooted in something far more primal than escapism. It connects directly to what neuroscientists call the default mode network, the part of your brain that activates not when you are focused on a task, but when you are left alone with yourself. When external stimulation drops, this network lights up, and what it does is simulate social reality. It runs scenarios, it rehearses outcomes, it processes unresolved emotional experiences by replaying them with different endings. In other words, your brain is not malfunctioning at night. Your brain is doing exactly what brains are designed to do. It is trying to heal something. It is trying to finish something. It is trying to resolve emotional experiences that your waking life never gave you the space or safety to process fully. Research in attachment theory adds another layer entirely. Psychologists suggest that people who develop rich, consistent fantasy lives, particularly around themes of being understood, chosen, or finally getting to say the right thing, often grew up in environments where emotional expression was unsafe, unpredictable, or simply not met with the response it needed. So the brain learned to meet its own emotional needs in the only space where it had total control, the imagination. And nighttime, when the noise of the day finally falls away, is when that process runs at full power. And here is the hidden superpower inside all of this that nobody ever frames this way. The fact that your brain does this means you have a level of narrative intelligence, emotional depth, and imaginative capacity that is genuinely rare. You are not passively consuming reality. You are actively constructing it, questioning it, rewriting it. That is the cognitive signature of deeply creative, deeply empathetic, deeply self-aware people. Writers do this, therapists do this, visionaries do this. The internal world you've been quietly ashamed of is actually evidence of a mind that refuses to accept shallow emotional experiences as sufficient. Your brain is holding out for something realer and deeper than what the surface of daily life typically delivers. That is not a flaw. That is a standard. The scenarios you build also function as emotional rehearsal. You are practicing vulnerability in a space where failure has no consequences. You are testing out versions of yourself that feel more authentic than the one you performed all day. That midnight version of you, the one who says the right thing, who is fully seen, who finally gets the love or respect or closure they needed, that is not a delusion. That is your brain showing you in the clearest possible way exactly what you are still hungry for. But here's the burden that lives inside this habit, and it is a real one. The more satisfying that internal world becomes, the harder the return to waking life hits. You can wake up the next morning and feel a grief you cannot explain, a low, quiet sadness that has no obvious source because some part of you just left a world that felt more emotionally complete than the one you have to walk back into. Over time, some people begin to prefer the night, not because they are depressed necessarily, but because the night is the only time they feel fully themselves, fully safe, fully in control of their own narrative. And that preference, if left unexamined, quietly widens the gap between who you are inside and who you show up as in daylight. There's also the exhaustion, because this is not restful mental activity. Your brain is running complex emotional simulations at the exact moment it is supposed to be powering down. You are falling asleep later than you should, waking up less restored than you need, and carrying a kind of interior life so rich and so active that the daylight hours can feel almost gray by comparison. And the loneliest part, the part that genuinely deserves to be acknowledged, is that this entire world exists in complete silence. Nobody knows about it, nobody has ever been invited in, and carrying something that vivid, that emotional, that real, entirely alone, that is its own specific kind of exhausting. So here's the truth about those nighttime stories. They are not a symptom of something wrong with you. They are a map. They are your psyche drawing you a detailed, emotionally precise picture of what you need, what you haven't said, what you haven't healed, and what you are still waiting for your real life to give you. The scenarios are not the problem. The gap they are pointing to, that is what deserves your attention. You built entire worlds in the dark because the lit one didn't always have room for the full version of you. And the fact that you kept building, kept creating, kept returning to that internal space night after night, that is not escapism. That is resilience. That is a mind that refused to stop reaching for something more real than what it was handed. The goal is not to stop. The goal is to start closing the gap, to bring even a fraction of that emotional honesty, that self-expression, that fully realized version of yourself, because that person you are at midnight, they are not a fantasy. They are the most honest version of you that exists, and they deserve to be awake. If this hits somewhere specific and quiet, this channel exists for exactly that. Subscribe for weekly deep dives into the psychology of the inner life most people never talk about. You clearly already live there. You might as well understand it.